I'm Gerald Bentley, and welcome to Wrestling with Sales. Today, we are joined by the man behind New England Championship Wrestling, coming back soon onto YouTube with New England Championship Wrestling legendary, Sheldon Goldberg. And Sheldon, I wanted to talk with you about the challenges of running a promotion, how you deal with coming back from COVID, and then, of course, we also want to talk about your new book. It's available now on Amazon, A Pro Wrestler's Odyssey: The Last Fall by Sheldon Goldberg. And we'll ask about what went into doing that, because you obviously have years of stories that can go into a book, and it's definitely an interesting business. But Sheldon, thanks a lot for joining us here today.
Gerald, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you.
Yeah. Now, you had a chance to run New England Championship Wrestling for well over 20 years.
Yeah.
How much of
you get less time for felonies?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think people realize. They see WWE, they see AEW. I don't think people realize, just casual fans just watching, how many independent territories there are and how many people there are like you putting the work in day to day to make that territory go. How much work do you think it is on a weekly basis to make an independent territory up and running?
It's basically the equivalent of a full-time job. I mean, I wasn't really doing it full-time because I did have a regular job on top of running the company, but I would say I was putting in anywhere from 20 to 40 hours a week every week. It looks easy from the outside. You get a bunch of wrestlers, you get a ring, you get a building, you put on a show, and it's so much more than that. There are so many intangibles. There's the marketing, there's the promotion, there's all the little things that go into putting on professional wrestling on a regular basis. The booking, the management. We did a lot of innovative things in our history. New England Championship Wrestling started in 2000, and in 2000 there was no YouTube.
Yeah.
Social media was not a thing. It was a very different landscape, and the whole idea of independent wrestling was something that was relatively new. At least the independent wrestling in this era of the wrestling business was new at the time. The territories over the previous 10 years had pretty much disappeared. And now, instead of the big offices doing spot shows in different little towns, that business really fell to independent promoters.
Yeah, sure.
Who are not full-time businesses, who are just running shows here and there to kind of sort of fill the space that the old spot shows of the territory days used to occupy. And it was a necessary thing, because what had happened was the foundation had come loose from the wrestling business with the national expansion of pro wrestling in the 80s and 90s, and the stripping away of the traditional wrestling territories. What pro wrestling needed was a point of entry for new talent. And that was the place that independent wrestling filled. And it took years. Now the business is far more developed than it was when I first started. It was really a new thing. One of the biggest challenges that I had as a promoter was just promoting the very idea of what we're doing. Like, yeah, it's the same thing that you see in an arena. There's a ring, there's wrestlers, there's matches, but it's in a smaller, much more intimate location. It's local guys and girls, and occasionally some people from outside of the area coming in to spice it up. And it's a regular promotion like what you see on TV, except a much smaller version of that. So that was the biggest challenge. I had a PR background before I got into wrestling. I used to produce theater.
Oh, really?
And before that, did publicity for Broadway shows and shows on tour. So I had a background in publicity before I got into wrestling, which really served me very, very well in terms of getting New England Championship Wrestling off the ground. I didn't have a lot of money, so I had to just work really hard and work on a grassroots basis to pull things together, and that's pretty much what took place.
Yeah, and I think it's a really, really good example because ran into you on LinkedIn, connected with you on LinkedIn, where I put a lot of auto sales training content on. And the reason why I started the show is because I think it's a good parallel to sales training without just talking about the same thing that every sales training ends up being in monologues. And you can see those lines where you have to create that desire for the product, get your name out there without an unlimited budget, and built up a base. And that's what you see independent territories doing all around the country now. And it's kind of building back up. It's really interesting if you take a look back. We're almost now back to the point where we were when it was just the old WWF and the NWA, and then you had little companies that would do monthly shows, or some of them a little bigger doing weekly shows, and they were building it up and developing the talent so then that talent could go up to the major leagues. And like you
Right,
said, it was only that nationalization that collapsed everything, because you
right.
had that maybe a decade where you had the AWA, the WWF, and WCW going at each other, and then AWA and WCW burnt themselves out, and you were just left with, at that point, the WWE. And
Yeah.
then you had a 10-year period where there wasn't much, and that created the opportunity for promotions like New England Championship Wrestling to rise up and kind of fill that void.
Yeah, that's exactly that. That's a very good summation of pretty much what happened. When we started, there was a WWF, a WCW, an ECW, and
Oh,
I
sure.
want to say USWA was still in business,
Hmm.
but heading out the door at that particular point in time. But that was pretty much it. That was pro wrestling, and then there was everybody else. Everybody else was trying to get a piece of uh, what the big companies had left behind in terms of getting out of the spot show business.
Yeah, where you would have they used to do touring shows with a smaller crew, whereas now what you see when the WWE and AEW go to town, it's generally speaking about what 95% of the time, it's the live TV show. So it's
Basically, yeah,
basically a studio
yeah,
show where you're drawing fans to have an audience for the TV. They don't do
exactly.
really the house shows anymore. WWE does some of them. They do a couple a week, but nothing like they used to do where it was 5 days a week and you had two different crews and you were running 10 shows a week. That's gone
Yeah,
away.
yeah, exactly. It's become like the Harlem Globetrotters or the Ice Capades or whatever. It's an arena attraction,
Hmm.
a touring arena attraction. Whether they're shooting TV or they're not, it's an arena business and not the spot shows have pretty much disappeared for the major companies. I mean, very seldom do they do a smaller market show these days. It just doesn't pay them to do it.
Yeah, well, and I mean, as evident by the major news in wrestling this week, I mean, Raw is Netflix,
Yeah,
$5 billion. You can't really question their decision to emphasize TV if somebody's going to give you 5 billion.
that's for sure. I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago, 20 years ago that something like that could ever take place?
Yeah, no, because the thinking then was that okay, this is it. Pro
Mm.
wrestling's dying or dead, and Vince McMahon wanted to be the only game in town. But people like yourself
That's a
gave it a
misconception.
little.
It wasn't it
Oh,
wasn't
really?
dying and it wasn't dead.
Okay.
No, it wasn't. There was always wrestling was always going to be out there in some way, shape, or form or another. What Vince McMahon did was he found a way to market it on a bigger level. And what he did in the process of doing that was make everything underneath it less relevant. It doesn't mean that it wasn't viable. It just meant that, if you're running big arenas, you know, seating, 15, 20, 25,000 people, why are you going to go into a high school gym that holds 2,000 people? You're just not. It doesn't make any sense. Why
Yeah.
seat? Why sell 2,000 tickets when you can sell 20,000 tickets? The decision in that respect is easy from a financial point of view
From
and from a marketing point of view.
yeah. How did you compete against that?
Well, we
What did you
didn't.
find to be okay?
We didn't compete against it. We just said we're going to be over here in our space doing what we do,
Yeah.
and they're going to be in another space doing what they do. I mean, the idea of your friendly neighborhood wrestling promotion was one that I embraced. That you're going to go to your local VFW hall or local community center and you're going to get an intimate experience. It's like off Broadway versus Broadway, if I can use that a theatrical
No, that's
analogy.
fair. Sure.
So yeah, it wasn't that it was dying or dead or not viable. It's just that one guy found a better way to do it, and the old way wasn't necessarily not viable. Just the conditions changed, and those of us on the lower end of the spectrum, we just try to find a way to exist within the space that we had.
Now, I want to ask you about two things. One, of course, the book coming out. We'll save the book for the last segment.
Okay.
The last fall. Sorry, already out, available now on Amazon. New England Championship Wrestling coming back in a way to theaters. You said you were working on.
Yeah. I've had a series of difficulties over the last number of years. 6 years ago, I shattered my right shoulder in a fall.
Oh.
And I recovered from that, and I did fine. I went to a less frequent schedule of shows, and was attempting to ramp up. And then, of course, the pandemic took place.
Mm-hmm.
And the pandemic really kind of shut the door on us for quite a while. And now, about 16 months ago, I had an episode of kidney failure.
Oh.
So yeah, it's been a challenge. I mean, I'm on dialysis now and awaiting a kidney transplant. So I had this faced with this challenge of what was I going to do? Was I going to be in a position to be able to run regular shows again? Well, I would really need a solid team to do that, and a pretty a deeper set of pockets in terms of financing to be able to do that. And just at this particular moment, that wasn't in the cards. But I wasn't going to do nothing. I was going to do something. So one of the things that we had done during the pandemic, our 20th anniversary came up during that period of time. So since I wasn't able to do a live show, what I did was I put together a YouTube playlist, a series of 20 videos representing 20 years of New England Championship Wrestling, and put it up on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/NECW Wrestling. And if you look under playlists, you'll see NECW 20th Anniversary Collection. So it's 20 matches that represent 20 years of New England Championship Wrestling. There's a lot of stars in there before they became famous. There's a lot of epic matches that took place in the history of the company that you'll find up there. And it's a pretty fair video document on the history of what we had done over 20 years. So very proud of that. Very proud of the New England Championship Wrestling Legendary Series, which is also another YouTube playlist. I did that as basically therapy and recovering from a shoulder injury.
Okay.
And that is a series of 12 videos. Again, many stars before they became famous. Kofi Kingston's first TV promo ever, anywhere. The artist currently known as Finn Balor, formerly known as Fergal Devitt, appears in that series. Bobby Fish, Eddie Edwards, bunch of stars.
Yeah.
That you'll be able to see in early matches in their career and making a great accounting of themselves. And the other thing was, when I was in the hospital with kidney failure, I was in the hospital for about a month.
Oh.
And I'm laying there in the hospital, and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. I don't quite know what that something is going to be at this moment, but I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to not do nothing, but do whatever it is that I can do. So the two things were the Lost Matches Project, which we just described.
Yeah.
And I decided I was going to write a novel.
Yeah, let's get that book back up there. Go ahead.
Let me see that you're holding this up in the background. Let me just
there you go.
On the other side
fall.
there. Yep, The Last Fall. So The Last Fall is a fictional story of a wrestler named Rick Pacheco, and it follows his life and career from literally stumbling into the business of professional wrestling at the age of 11 in 1971 through the end of his in-ring career in 1999. And it follows his ups and downs as a person and as a professional wrestler, all against the backdrop of an industry that goes through very radical changes. And while it is a work of fiction, you'll find a lot of truth in the fictionalization of the story. In the fictionalization of the story, the pro wrestling territories disappear in the wake of national companies forming and promoting wrestling on a national basis. There's a little bit of everything in the story. There's a love story. There's all sorts of stuff that happens to Rick in the course of his career. And it's kind of a profound document on, what wrestling used to be versus what it became and why it became that. So I'm happy to say it's gotten rave reviews since it was released in October. And I hope people get a chance to check it out. It's really worth your time.
Yeah, I mean it's a great topic too, because when you think about that, there were champions in every major city. Every major city had a little territory that was, you know, actually a halfway decent sized territory. A lot of them were on local TV.
Right.
They fed into the NWA, and those people were local heroes. I'm here in Kansas City. Kansas Cityans, you mentioned Bulldog Bob Brown, who was the Central
Right.
States Wrestling Champion. Man, it was 40 years ago, but people still go, "Oh yeah," or Bob Geigel. I mean, they remember them. Those
Sure.
guys were the kings of their city, and then really it kind of went away because those guys who were champions of their cities were just hoping to try and get on somewhere as an undercard with WCW or WWE, and the territory systems just kind of fell by the wayside. I guess kind of collapsed under the growth of TV. So it's
That's right.
definitely an extremely interesting story that if you're a fan of wrestling today, you can really appreciate everything that happened in the time by reading through that and seeing it through somebody's eyes as opposed to just reading history.
Right. One of the other things that I wanted to accomplish with this book is that, when you see TV shows or movies on professional wrestling, the wrestling may be portrayed well and accurately, but the business is never portrayed well or portrayed accurately. In The Last Fall, it's a pretty accurate depiction, even though it's fictional,
Hmm.
of what the territories were like, what small town markets were like, coming under a big territory, and then what happened when the business went national, and what changes took place and why. Um, it explains it really well, and I think that when people read the book, they'll really get a flavor for what that period was when wrestling went from being a patchwork quilt of regional territories to basically national operations that dominated the landscape.
And like we said, you can get that right now on Amazon. It is available. You can also download it onto your Kindle. So if you're a wrestling fan, if you're watching AEW, WWE, New Japan, any of the promotions that we show here on Wrestling Spotlight or Fired Up Network, definitely well worth the read because it is an extremely interesting time in the sport where a lot of changes happened. And really that time period is what set up what we're seeing now, where promoters like yourself have said, wait a minute, hey, we can promote this on YouTube. We can get on channels like Wrestling Spotlight, like Fired Up Network, and we can get our content out there. And it's different, but you have to adapt to the new realities and use the tools at your disposal
Right.
to promote.
Right. In the course of New England Championship Wrestling, we had two runs on television. The first one was in 2010. We were on cable.
Okay.
We were on Comcast On Demand. And if you were a Comcast or Xfinity subscriber, you have an on-demand channel, and there was a way to find it.
Mm-hmm.
And you could watch our shows every week on that. Of course, we also had them on YouTube. We also had them available online. Before there was YouTube, we were doing this. We were doing like a weekly TV show that we posted on our website. It was at the very beginning of the rise of streaming media. We had done that for
Yeah.
actually quite a while. We were the pioneers of that. We were the first independent promotion to do that. And when we started doing that, we would get tens of thousands of views every week, because now all of a sudden, people anywhere you had a computer and an internet connection, you could watch our wrestling from wherever you are. So it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
just people locally; it was people all over the country and literally all over the world. I mean, I used to get emails from people in England saying, "When is New England Championship Wrestling coming to Yorkshire or whatever?" And I had to explain to them, "No, it's not. We're not in England. We're in the United States. We're in New England."
Yeah.
So yeah, so it was pretty interesting that we had fans literally everywhere, and it was an influence to them. A lot of the smaller companies in those countries looked at what we were doing and say, "Hey, maybe we could do this too." So
Sure.
we were a very profound influence on a lot of companies in the uh, pioneering of streaming local wrestling.
Well, a lot of innovation, and you got to be proud of some of the accomplishments too, because heck, that's
Yeah,
quite the
we
list of
wanted to be
stars
on
there.
TV. We wanted to be on TV, but we simply couldn't afford it. We couldn't
Yeah.
afford to buy the time at that particular moment. So we just said, okay, well, what's the next best thing? We could have been on cable access, but that meant bicycling a tape from town to town,
Mm-hmm.
and your show would cover a town. It wouldn't cover an area. It wouldn't cover multiple towns. You have to have multiple tapes that you sent out or delivered
Yeah.
to different local cable systems, and that wasn't practical. Whereas if you put it up online, everybody could see it everywhere. All you needed was a computer and an internet connection, and there you were. So the shows when we started were pretty rudimentary, but as time went on, the production got better and slowly developed. And it was a great experience because it prepared us for actually being on television. It prepared us for the idea of originally when we were doing these online shows, since it wasn't on a regular broadcast station, we didn't have any constrictions in terms of time.
Sure.
So an episode could have been 15 minutes one week, 18 minutes the next week, 36 minutes the week after that. There were no rules. We could just do
Yeah.
whatever we wanted to do. And as time went on, we started to tighten up our production and began to fit it to a specific time frame and a specific time slot, and it was good training for us.
Well, and obviously good training for some of the guys you still see on TV every week. Eddie Edwards in TNA, Kofi Kingston with the New Day, and Finn Balor. of
Right. It
Judgment
was
Day, all
what we
all
were
got the TV
offering.
starts.
What we were offering was something that nobody else was offering, which was a platform to be seen.
Yeah,
Um, it's one thing to have a match in a building and the people in the building see it. It's another thing to tape that match and then show it literally worldwide. When we were on our second run of television, which was on a local broadcast station, we were on a late night time slot. We were on Thursday nights at 12:30 a.m. But the
okay.
minute the show went off the air, it was available on YouTube. So if you missed it on the air, you could go back and watch it whenever you wanted, wherever you wanted. And we were getting, 30, 40, 50,000 views a week at one point.
Yeah, it's terrific.
So we had an audience. We had a very substantial audience, and it just showed that something like that was viable. And now, of course, you have streaming networks and
Mhm.
uh, things like Independent Wrestling Television and the High Spots Network and organizations like that that offer multiple promotions. But as I say, we were the pioneers of all that.
It's a very impressive story, and I'm sure some of that is in the book as well. We'll just get the book up here one more time before we wrap up. The Last Fall: A Pro Wrestler's Odyssey, following the path of our character, the hero of the story, Rick Pacheco, as he rolls through the world of pro wrestling from the age of 11 until the end of his in-ring career in 1999. And that time period just follows, ebbs and flows right with the fall of the territories and the rise of
Right.
national wrestling. Sheldon, thanks a lot for coming on, and I'm sure people are going to go and find that book. It's a super interesting time, and there's so many lessons that you can pull out of what you guys did with New England Championship Wrestling, creating your own market, creating not necessarily creating the platform, but taking the platforms that are available and using them to the
Right.
best of their ability. Just one
And
last, yeah, go ahead.
you can go on our YouTube channel and see lots of old TV shows, and there's literally hundreds of videos up there.
Awesome. And I had just one last question. How do you feel about the state of independent wrestling today?
Well, it's a much more developed business than it was when I started. As I said before, when I started, it was a struggle just to, you know, have people buy into the idea of independent wrestling, that you're going to go to a local place, a little place, and see a little show. And, it's sort of an up close and personal experience as opposed to an arena experience. Now it's commonplace,
Yeah,
and selling the idea of it isn't really necessary. I think also the pandemic ramped up the demand for local shows. So you see people coming out to shows in numbers that are pretty impressive in a lot of places. They may not be big buildings, they may not be arenas settings, but there's a demand there for independent shows that we fought hard to try to develop when we were operating at the beginning. So it's good to see.
yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, thanks a lot for stepping here into the ring. And by all means, let us know when there's more developments with New England Championship Wrestling. And I'm sure the whole wrestling community is pulling for you as your health issues, your battle continues a little bit. But I'm sure it's a fight that you'll win.
Yep, thank you so much. I feel blessed. I feel better than I felt in about 5 or 10 years, actually. So
Oh, that's
that's a
terrific.
good thing. And yeah, so there's a chance that we could be doing some live stuff fairly soon. I got contacted about doing a fundraising show for a group that I had done a fundraising show 4 years ago. So we might be doing that and doing a couple of new things like that. And you never know. If I hit the lottery or whatever, I might just put some cash into ramping everything back up again. But in the meantime,
Awesome.
I'll come up with stuff. There's a sequel to The Last Fall being written right now called
Oh, good.
After the Bell, and hopefully that'll be available late in the spring. Um, and it takes place 17 years from the end of The Last Fall, so it continues Rick's story through even more changes in pro wrestling and changes in his life. So
Oh, awesome. There's definitely plenty of stories to tell. Well, Sheldon,
Yeah.
thanks a lot for joining us here on Wrestling with Sales. And by all means, stay tuned to the Fired Up Network and Wrestling Spotlight for more. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.